Hello and welcome back to NewsX. I'm Joshua Barnes, and today we will be diving into a discussion on Biden's final foreign policy speech. US President Joe Biden delivered a speech at the State Department defending his administration's foreign policy just days before President-elect Donald Trump takes office. In his address, Biden emphasised the progress made during his 4 years, citing stronger US alliances and a more powerful America on the global scale. He highlighted US leadership in rallying NATO support for Ukraine amidst Russian invasion and reaffirmed his decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. Biden also pointed to his administration's efforts to compete with China on technological and economic fronts. His speech comes as ceasefire talks in Gaza continue, marking the final moments of Biden's presidency. We're joined by three guests today. Firstly, we have Scott Faulkner, the former Chief Administrator Office of the US House of Representatives and Director of Personnel for the Reagan campaign. We also have Irina Sukerman, Senior Journalist at the Washington Post, I believe. My apologies, Irina Sukerman, just a senior journalist. We also have Adrian Calamel, fellow at the Arabian Peninsula Institute. So, starting off, Adrian, I would like to really look at Biden's speech and look at the positive outlook that he has had on his time. Do you think that that is right? Do you think that what he was saying was true? Do you think he has left America in a better position than the one that it started in at the start of his presidency?
Well, thank you for having me back. And unfortunately, the history books aren't going to judge this Biden administration's foreign policy as a success. There probably should be case studies done as to what not to do. What we've seen over the last 4 years is deterrence lost on all fronts. Diplomatic solutions to military problems in many cases. You look at Biden's speech, he points to Afghanistan. I mean, that's mistake number one right there. Taliban was breaking stipulation after stipulation of the Doha agreement, and he continued the withdrawal in that haphazard approach that left thousands behind under Taliban rule. That greenlit Putin for the Ukraine, continuing to enrich the Islamic Republic, appease them, not enforce sanctions, play hostage diplomacy. For the first time, the United States has crossed the Rubicon where we paid money, $6 billion, for 5 hostages being held by the Islamic Republic. And 5 of those hostages, they didn't even want to come back to the United States. 2 of them, they stayed in country in the Islamic Republic. Taking the Houthis off the foreign terrorist organization list on day one. This is all signaling weakness, and hopefully that if we play nice and give you incentivize you in certain ways, you won't cause problems in the region. And what we see is the world's on fire. The only place where we haven't seen a conflict, and I think a lot of people were concerned about, is, there's a lot of action in the South China Sea, but we haven't seen an outright conflict between Taiwan and China yet. But that's what everybody's looking at.
Scott Faulkner, thank you for joining us. Do you think that Biden's comments on American involvement in these conflicts, do you think that that was a correct point? Do you think that American influence in these ongoing wars, as Adrian just mentioned, is a positive for the American country and the American people? It's something that Trump, of course, has come in and said that he wants to end, but Biden was very happy to throw his support behind his allies.
I totally agree with Adrian. I think it was a very pathetic and sad attempt to rewrite history. And that history over the last 4 years was Biden himself and his foreign policy team, which is probably the weakest in American history, strengthened our enemies, especially, Iran is stronger than it's ever been. China's stronger than it's ever been. Russia's strongest since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Iran is emboldened far more than even under Jimmy Carter. And we are in retreat and threatened all over the world. At the same time, America's ability to counter those threats has been completely undermined, especially with our southern border being erased and cartels and gangs from throughout Latin America basically permeating major cities throughout America. So we are in a deep hole, which hopefully the new administration will be able to dig us out of as quickly as possible.
I'd like to look at the points that Joe Biden made regarding the potential ceasefires that we're seeing, specifically between Israel and Gaza. He, of course, has sent an envoy. He's tried to play a part in the closing of this ceasefire deal. Do you think that's one positive that he can take from his presidency? Or do you think the impact potentially of Donald Trump might have had more of an impact than Biden's? While we fix the issues that we're facing there with Irina, I will come back to you, Adrian, and I'll pose the same question in terms of Biden's role in a potential ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Do you think that his role is a substantial one? And do you think potentially it might have been Donald Trump and his words that have sort of pushed the hand of those who were writing this deal?
Great question. I think the rhetoric from the Trump administration absolutely plays a factor in this, but I think the Biden administration is rushing towards any type of positive legacy that it can leave with its foreign policy, and somehow it believes that a ceasefire deal that still leaves Hamas intact, I mean, they're in trouble, but they can rebuild. Somehow that's going to be a positive move for the future. And we also have to look at the envoy that's been negotiating these deals, these hostage deals. It's Brett McGurk in Doha, the same individuals who negotiated the $6 billion for 5 hostages. Where this individual shows up, America ends up making really bad deals with bad individuals and forces other countries into making bad deals.
Scott Faulkner, looking at the Russia-Ukraine war and Biden's potential influence there, money has of course been flowing through from the US to Ukraine. He also visited President Zelensky in 2023. Do you think Biden has any legacy in regards to Ukraine's efforts to stave off Vladimir Putin and his forces? Or do you think that this is just, again, an attempt from him to put his name into the history books, as you've said already?
Well, again, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is because of Biden's weakness. Russia looked at what happened in Afghanistan, and they immediately pushed the envelope because they figured they could. Also, for all the rhetoric and all the money that the United States under Biden has sent, they have sent the wrong equipment, or they've slow-rolled the wrong equipment. So they have not really helped Ukraine win. They just helped Ukraine survive. And Ukraine will only survive if it can win, and we've done everything wrong in Ukraine.
Adrian, coming back to you, the world seems to be at conflict, and somebody who said that they're going to work their hardest to end that is Donald Trump. Do you think that the state that Biden's leaving the American country and the world diplomacy in is anything of note that Trump can take into his administration? But something Biden said. He said he's handing over Trump a sort of better situation than the one he found it in. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do not. Trump has to put toothpaste back in the bottle, which is extremely difficult here. Now, it can be done. They're already working on a transition plan, and you can see the forward-leaning foreign policy plan to restore some type of collective deterrence with our allies. But I don't see a place in the world. I mean, you go to Latin America, Venezuela, you look at Bangladesh, what happened there, the Biden administration was supporting that coup at the beginning, this Islamist coup. There is not a bright spot, really, other than the fact that Putin has drained, if anything, we should be thanking Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel for eliminating Hezbollah, Nasrallah, defanging them, taking care of Hamas. They've done more to help America in the long run than the Biden administration has done. I'm sorry to say that, but it's just kind of the way the Biden administration's foreign policy has gone.
We can now go to Irina Tsukaman. Irina, thank you very much for joining us. You are in New York. Is there optimism with the people of America and the people of New York that things are going to get better for the American people? And do you think this message and this broadcast from Joe Biden is being taken in by anybody?
Well, thank you so much for this question. Of course, the people who voted for Donald Trump are feeling optimistic, and the people who did not are not particularly favorable to his presidency. And everybody's just going to have to wait and see what happens. But Joe Biden's term was such an absolute disaster. It was disaster for so many factors, some of them deliberate policy, some of them just plain corruption, mismanagement, and incompetence, and some of it a combination of those two factors. That I think many people, even if they don't agree with Donald Trump or dread what may happen, are glad to leave the Biden presidency behind. Of course, Trump is engaging in a lot of rhetoric that appears to be unpredictable, unstable, and not necessarily relevant to his own priorities. Some of his team members raise questions, but we also know that a lot of Trump's nominees don't tend to stick around for too long. I have a feeling that a lot of the most objectionable people that many people are concerned about may not be there for too long. They may be basically just transitional people he feels he owes for their involvement in the campaign, and as soon as there's a sign of problem, they may probably be replaced. At the very least, there are signs that there's going to be a good faith effort in addressing the problems that are clearly ongoing, and that the Biden administration has deliberately allowed to fester. We may not agree with everything Donald Trump is going to do, but we do know that he is going to try to address them consciously. And we also know that a lot of his extreme campaign rhetoric is already being rolled back as the president-elect is facing reality. We are seeing that his promises to end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours are not close to what's actually going to happen. We're seeing that Russia is resisting his attempts for peace negotiations, and we're seeing rhetoric from his advisors indicating that he will take tough measures against anyone who is not willing to be engaged in genuine diplomacy. So he has no problem with imposing sanctions or imposing deterrence when he sees that the aggressors are not willing to play ball. So despite whatever his intentions may be and whatever his preferred policies may be, he will not simply roll over if he sees that it's not working.
Scott Faulkner, how damaging do you think it was that Biden stepped down from the presidential election race? And how damaging do you think it was regarding the rhetoric of his ability to lead, questions over his age, questions over his ability to run a country the size of the United States? Do you think this really is a black mark on his presidency? And how much of an impact do you think it will have when people look back on his time?
Well, I think it has a substantial impact because he literally was already enfeebled when he ran in 2020. That was why he had his basement strategy. The whole issue of locking down America for COVID was played into that strategy. And everybody involved in the media, in government, who were part and parcel to covering up his infirmity from day one should all be removed and never heard from again, because they lied. It's probably the biggest scandals in American history, even more than when Edith Wilson was propping up Wilson after the Treaty of Versailles. That was about a year or so of infirmity, and the world was not inflamed as much as it is now. So we really, in terms of hiding presidential infirmity and disability, this was the worst in American history, and everyone should be held accountable to it, and history will look upon this as a very dark time.
Adrian Calamel, we have spoken in depth about the negative of the Biden campaign in terms of his legacy and the situation of the world, I want to potentially look at a positive. We've seen unity between the United States and other partners. We've seen unity with Israel, we've seen unity with NATO, and we've seen unity with the EU in regards to Ukraine. So is there something that can be salvaged from the American people in terms of looking at Biden as those relationships have strengthened? If you look at Asia as well, Southeast Asia, East Asia, Korea, Japan, these are countries that are ruled by the United States' side. Is that something Biden can at least have some pride in?
I guess to a certain degree, he can hang his hat on some of the work that's been done in South China and working with Japan, working with the Philippines to try and counter China. But these are small measures. When you look at the big picture, I mean, again, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Gaza, Tehran, Lebanon. Yeah, there's really not a foreign policy success to point to, and that's scary. And this is something, these are the times when you hear allies or people in the Middle East, especially. I've heard them say the only thing more dangerous than being an enemy of the United States is being an ally of the United States, and that's because we don't have bipartisan, consistent foreign policy. And we've seen it vacillate over the last, and again, we're coming in with Trump, who's going to try and put a cork in this basically Obama, Biden foreign policy that's been running roughshod for the last 12 years or 16 years with the blip of the Trump 2016 to 2020.
Irina Tsukaman, looking at the situation across the globe, there is discontent. We're living in a post-COVID world where economies are struggling. We're seeing the rise of far-right parties where there is discontent over living conditions, cost of living. Do you think this is a case where Joe Biden's been the right guy at the wrong time, or do you think that he's further emphasised the struggles and the issues that have been facing economies across the world?
I think Joe Biden was the wrong guy at the wrong time for the last 50 years. I think he never had what it took, and I think he was just a horribly bad politician. That's to say, though, that there is no shortage of talentless hacks in politics, and the far-right parties are not really an answer to them. They're just an expression of public frustration with the individuals who are corrupt, mediocre, lack vision, lack acumen to respond, to listen to people, and to respond to their problems in a substantive and thoughtful way, and who are more concerned with staying in power and perpetuating the status quo and perpetuating their own perks of getting into power than they're concerned with governing. And we're seeing that in Europe. We've seen a lot of it in the US. Unfortunately, the far right is much better at articulating the problems than in proposing anything substantive to them, and a lot of their solutions are at least as bad as the original problems. But they are a legitimate way of expressing just how much of the public has had with a lot of the so-called centrist politicians. The problem is we're seeing that the far left and far right parties, really post-conventional politics parties, they're extreme. They're very committed to extremism. They're very committed to loud rhetoric. They're very committed to getting into power as much as the other side. But the so-called centrists, the liberals, are not particularly committed to their own values. And that, I think, is part of the problem. They're not vigorously, with enthusiasm, pursuing justice. They're not pursuing economic freedom and empowerment. They're not pursuing political freedom. And so the people are forced to choose between people who appear committed and people who appear uncommitted. So they will always choose the committed parties, no matter how evil, destructive, and so ideological or post-ideological or mercenary or adversarial or friendly to adversaries they may seem. The commitment matters.
Scott Faulkner, Irina Tsukaman there said that Biden was the wrong guy at the wrong time. What makes Donald Trump the right guy at the right time?
I think he is. I mean, again, I cut my teeth under the Reagan era, where we had almost 100-year provenance of conservative ideology and intellectual power. Trump is very much as a businessman, kind of does a lot of stuff on the fly. But I think this time around, he learned a lot of lessons from his first term, where he did not really have effective control of the branch. A lot of things happened on watch that shouldn't have. This time around, he's got a much stronger group of people coming in. He's got, with people like Elon Musk and others, he's starting to form his own cabinet of informal advisors. So I think he's more grounded. I think he's lost, he's basically understood what he lost in the first term and has learned his lessons. Also, we have I think, better players in the Senate and House and in Congress, and more importantly, with the downfall of Trudeau in Canada and the possibility of a conservative government there, with the new president of Mexico, we have three leaders who might be able to chart a new course in strengthening America and basically the Western Hemisphere.
Adrian Calamel, we've seen Biden talk about the alliance that is forming between nations that are not allies with the United States. What more could he have done to stop that happening, and how could he have put US in a better position moving forward?
That's a great question. The first thing was not pulling everybody out of Afghanistan at a predetermined date and leaving a residual force there, not closing Bagram Air Force Base. Those are things that could have been done. Ukraine, simple. I distinctly remember Blinken saying, ultimately, it's up to, this is the day before the invasion. Ultimately, it's up to Vladimir Putin whether he wants to invade. That's not deterrence. He could have stood up there and said, Putin, you invade Ukraine again, you're going to pay a significant price this time. Instead, we've been playing catch up. I think those two moves would have halted a lot of the horrible things that we've seen, especially the Islamic Republic enriching them and then allowing their proxies. And believe me, Hamas does not jump unless the Islamic Republic tells it to. That was ordered by the Islamic Republic. They saw the green light from what happened in Afghanistan, what happened in the Ukraine, and Putin was a little bit stretched in the Ukraine, so why not turn up the aperture and then launch another front? And that's the axis of resistance, as they call themselves, coordinating against our interests, against our allies. And there's things that could have been done from day one that unfortunately were not.
Irina Tsukaman, do you think that these two alliances that are forming, the US and their allies against Russia and their allies, do you think this could potentially escalate into a further conflict? And what is Joe Biden's role in potentially allowing that done to the safety of people living across the world, potentially?
I think the escalation has been ongoing against US and against Western countries for a long time. They just weren't paying attention. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, they're assorted proxies, regional proxies, assorted non-state actors. They've been working together and growing closer regardless of US foreign policy or European foreign policy. In fact, they were taking advantage of weak, undecisive or isolationist policy to try to advance their geopolitical agenda, as they should. When they see an opening, why wouldn't they do something like that? So I think it's a mistake to believe that if we abstain from taking a strong leadership position in the world, that somehow will make it a better place. On the contrary, not having clear leadership, not having these policemen encourages bad actors, and that's just human nature. Nothing has changed, nothing will ever change. We may not want to be, the first on the scene in every small confrontation, and we shouldn't necessarily be part of every conflict, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have clear deterrence, clear values, and clear paths to strengthening our alliances, to building up our allies, and to making sure that our alliance is so comprehensive and such a strong deterrent in itself that bad actors are simply discouraged from even trying. And what we're seeing instead is a lot of divisions, very public divisions that are being exploited by the actors. That's not to say that we can't do anything better, that NATO shouldn't be raising more funding. It would be better for them if they did. But these sort of public threats and confrontations are feeding into the political rhetoric that US and its allies are weak, that they cannot do anything, that they cannot withstand other weak states that actually don't have all that much to offer, and it's being used against us. So I would encourage Donald Trump and his team to review how they communicate and to review what sort of messaging they're comfortable with sending. It's okay to put pressure on allies to do better, but it has to be done in a way that strengthens us all instead of giving comfort to the enemy.
Scott Faulkner, to finish, as we look ahead, we are a week away now, just under a week away from Donald Trump's inauguration as the 47th US president. How do you think the shift of power will go, and do you think that the actions that Trump has promised will come as quickly as he's promised them to?
Supposedly, he will be signing at least 100 executive orders the moment he gets sworn in. What happens in America is in the inauguration, you have he gets sworn in, he has a speech, he then gets to start writing and signing these executive orders before the luncheon and then the parade. And then he goes back to the White House and will probably sign more executive order. That's hopefully going to reverse everything relating to what Biden did with Iran, and probably deal with a lot of other major issues on the international front besides the domestic. Certainly reversing the 90 executive orders that Biden put forward to weaken our southern border. So I think there'll be some strong signals in that first 24 hours of Trump being president as to what direction he takes and how fast.
Scott Faulkner, Aruna Zuckerman and Adrian Calamel, thank you so much for all joining us. We, of course, ramp up as we head towards Donald Trump's inauguration. And there's one place you want to be to watch it, and that's NewsX.